Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into sandals, brushing past cypress trees and wandering into the labyrinth of one of history's most curious empires. You're standing in ancient Pasargadae, the capital city of the Achaemenid Empire, and the light is doing that soft golden thing it does just before the stars arrive. The air is still, except for a lazy breeze that carries the scent of hyacinths, dust, and something vaguely citrusy. The sun is bowing out behind the distant Zagros Mountains, and every shadow stretches like it's trying to escape the day. You're in what used to be one of the most powerful cities on Earth. Or, well, what passed for a city back then. There are no bustling boulevards or skyscrapers, just a series of stone platforms, carved columns, and the faint outlines of garden walls that once whispered the ambitions of a king named Cyrus. And tonight, you're not here for war or glory or conquest. You're here for something delightfully mundane, watching that same king get completely, majestically lost in his own back garden. Yes, the same Cyrus the Great who conquered Babylon, founded one of the largest empires of the ancient world, and wrote what some people call the first charter of human rights. That Cyrus managed to get turned around in a rose maze like your slightly disoriented uncle at a county fair, and you're going to follow him every misstep of the way. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing this little sleepy community around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start at the gate of the garden, if you can even call it that. It's more like a regal portal framed in sun-baked stone, guarded not by spearmen or lions, but by two sleepy eunuchs in embroidered robes who don't even flinch when you walk by. It's that kind of city, so safe, so ordered, that even the guards know better than to interrupt the vibe. The garden opens before you. Endless rows of cypress, pomegranate, almond, and fig trees stretch out like organized chaos. Some say this is the very blueprint for the Persian paradida, a word that eventually gives us paradise. That's no exaggeration. The place is stitched together with canals that gurgle gently beside footpaths. Birds chirp politely, as if auditioning for a bedtime soundscape. Everything smells like a perfume shop run by a poet. Rose, myrtle, maybe even a hint of jasmine if you breathe in slowly. The layout is symmetrical, or at least it thinks it is. You've got 4 main quadrants divided by water channels that meet at a central fountain, the old Chahar Bagh design. You know, the classic 4-garden motif beloved in Persian architecture. Everything about it is meant to represent cosmic order. Water, earth, air, and fire in leafy form. It's brilliant. It's ambitious. It's also incredibly disorienting once the sun goes down and everything starts to look like more plants. Right now though, it's twilight. You pad down a gravel path that crunches just enough to feel satisfying underfoot. A few low torches flicker to life along the edges, but mostly you're navigating by feel and scent, and a vague sense of direction that's about to prove tragically inadequate. You spot him at the center of it all, Cyrus himself. No golden throne or canopy, just a tall man in plain robes sitting on a stone bench, legs stretched out, eyes scanning the horizon like a philosopher trying to solve an emotional math problem. His beard is neatly combed, his sandals look suspiciously new, and there's a soft scowl of thoughtfulness on his face, as though he's just remembered something mildly irritating from 3 campaigns ago. This is not the image of a king pacing a war room. No scrolls, no secretaries, just one man contemplating roses. It would be poetic if it weren't so oddly specific. Cyrus leans down and sniffs one of the blossoms, then sneezes. He looks briefly betrayed. You try not to laugh, but he catches your eye and grins. You ever spend 10 years designing a garden, he says, only to realize you're allergic to it. Classic Cyrus. You've heard the stories. Conqueror of the Medes, the Lydians and the Babylonians, a military genius who preferred diplomacy to decapitation. He's the kind of ruler who once let a deposed king keep his villa because the curtains were nice. And here he is, telling Dad jokes to the air. He stretches, stands up, and casually mutters something about just a short stroll, which is, of course, the ancient Persian version of "I'll be right back." He doesn't bring an attendant, doesn't carry a lamp. He just wanders into the left quadrant of the garden, hands behind his back like he owns the place, which, technically, he does. You decide to follow. Not closely, of course. Just enough to keep him in sight. The air is cooler now, and the birds are giving their final tweets of the evening. Somewhere in the distance, a canal gurgles like it's digesting something slowly. As you walk, you realize something curious. The layout, while beautiful, is aggressively symmetrical. Every path forks into 2 others. Every hedge has a twin. There are no signs, no markers, just rows upon rows of greenery and stone. It's like walking through a giant perfumed Sudoku puzzle. Historians still argue whether the original Pasargadae garden was ever truly finished. Some say Cyrus died before the final phase. Others claim it was always evolving. Plants added and moved seasonally. Water channels altered for flavour rather than function. Either way, the result is less a place of relaxation and more a leafy labyrinth with a tendency to gently gaslight its own creator. You look ahead, and Cyrus is already gone from sight. Somewhere in the hedges, a bird laughs. You quicken your pace, turning left at a row of pomegranate trees that look frustratingly like the row you just passed. The gravel crunches beneath your feet, but the sound feels muffled now, as if the garden itself is holding its breath. You're not entirely sure where Cyrus has gone, but judging by the faint rustling and occasional muttered "blast these vines," you're not far behind. Cyrus the Great, immortalized in stone reliefs, praised in the Bible, respected even by his enemies, is currently swatting at a branch like a man who's just walked face first into a particularly opinionated plum tree. You find him mid-stagger, trying to regain his kingly composure while adjusting his belt and pretending that didn't just happen. He shoots a sideways glance at a bush as if it insulted his mother. This, you realize, is a man who may rule from the Nile to the Indus, but who can absolutely be humbled by a stubborn cluster of oleanders. You clear your throat softly, not wanting to startle him. He half turns and says, "You didn't see that, did you?" He knows you did, but he smiles anyway, brushing leaves from his shoulders. Now, you might assume this whole getting lost in your own garden business is rare. But according to one of the gardeners, whom you'll meet later, Cyrus does this all the time. Apparently, this labyrinthine layout is his pride and joy, inspired by Babylonian geometry and Median horticulture. He once said he wanted a garden that could contain the mind as well as the body. He certainly contains something. You follow as he starts walking again, this time down a path lined with short myrtle hedges and saffron flowers. The moon has begun to rise, pale and slightly judgmental, and the sky turns that deep indigo that makes every torch feel warmer. Cyrus pauses, takes a deep breath, and says, "I used to think war was the hardest art to master. But garden design..." He trails off, either pondering something profound or mentally mapping out how to annihilate this particular pathway. There's something deeply endearing about watching a man who once engineered the fall of Babylon now try and fail to find the hibiscus archway that leads back to the palace. You ask if he needs help. He waves you off. No, I have it. It's left at the water channel, then past the poppies. Or was it the olives? He frowns. Do olives even grow here? They do, just not in this quadrant. Cyrus stops beside a gurgling stone fountain shaped like a lion, its mouth perpetually spitting a thin stream of water. He leans on the rim, staring into it as if expecting answers. A few leaves float lazily across the surface. "Did you know," he says quietly, "that the Persians believe water carries memory?" He flicks a drop from his fingers into the pool. Some say these fountains whisper back if you listen. You try. You hear frogs, maybe a cricket. No whispering revelations from the underworld, unfortunately. He straightens and announces, with theatrical confidence, "I believe this is north." It is, in fact, east. But no one argues with the king. As you continue, you pass a series of neatly trimmed juniper bushes. They're shaped like lions, although some are beginning to resemble angry pine cones. Cyrus pauses beside one and says, "That one's supposed to be me." You squint. It looks more like a startled hedgehog, but you nod encouragingly. This garden, you begin to realize, isn't just a hobby. It's a battlefield in disguise. Every tree has been positioned like a unit in formation. The irrigation channels, they flow like a general's battle plan. And the symmetry, the relentless, dizzying symmetry, mirrors the order Cyrus demands from the universe. Historians still argue whether Cyrus designed the garden entirely on his own, or had help from Babylonian engineers and Elamite botanists. The truth is probably a mix, but the vision is undeniably his. A paradise of power, perfection, and yes, mild confusion. He stops suddenly. "Have you noticed," he whispers, "that everything's echoing?" He's right. The hedges are so thick here, and the water channels so precisely arranged, that sound travels strangely. His own footsteps bounce back at odd angles. Distant frogs sound like they're right beside you. You laugh nervously, but Cyrus doesn't. He's listening, seriously now, as if the garden has turned into a council of invisible ministers whispering among themselves. Then, from somewhere nearby, there's a thump. You both freeze. It's probably a fruit dropping, or maybe a rabbit, or the ghost of some poor gardener who got lost and never made it out. Cyrus sighs. "Well," he mutters, If I die in here, tell the Empire it was, in the pursuit of symmetry. You assure him you will. You might even embellish a little. He takes off his sandals, yes, removes them entirely, and dangles his feet in one of the cooler water channels. He looks out over the darkening hedges, the moon catching the silver threads in his robe, and says, "You know, when I conquered Babylon, they thought I would burn the temples, but I didn't. I just wanted their scribes. They write everything down." He pauses. Maybe one of them will write this down. They did, Cyrus. Sort of. You sit beside him, the cool marble edging of the water channel pressing through your robes. A pair of small birds argue softly in the bushes, their chirping swallowed quickly by the dense greenery. Cyrus plucks a single mint leaf from a nearby patch and rubs it between his fingers, releasing a fresh, sharp scent that cuts through the musky, floral air. This part, he says, gesturing vaguely at the surrounding hedges, was meant to represent Mount Kaf. You nod slowly, trying to recall if Mount Kaf is a real place or one of those mythical mountains that Persian poets love to name drop. Spoiler, it's mythical, said to be the cosmic mountain that encircles the world, home of the Simurgh, a giant bird with a suspiciously human vocabulary and a flair for riddles. He leans in. The gardeners didn't quite understand the concept, so they just planted more lavender. You glance around. Lavender as far as the eye can see. He sighs and stands, brushing imaginary dust from his robe. The scent of crushed mint still clings to his fingers. You know, he muses, this entire garden was designed to mirror the Achaemenid ideal of order. Every quadrant, every water channel, it's all math, the good kind. Historians agree that Persian gardens, paradisa, as the old Persian word goes, was some of the earliest examples of formal landscape architecture, perfectly symmetrical, walled, always featuring water, shade, and a balance of elements. They weren't just pretty, they were metaphors for power, stability, and divine favor. Basically, the original flex gardens. Cyrus had his laid out in quadrants, separated by 4 flowing streams that met in the center, forming a massive cross shape when viewed from above. Each quadrant represented a different elemental domain: air, water, fire, and earth. Allegedly. That part's debated. Some scholars argue it was purely aesthetic. Others say it was spiritual engineering. And some say Cyrus was just obsessed with making enemies walk the long way around his hedges. Still, one detail no one disputes. Cyrus imported flora from all corners of his empire: Egyptian papyrus, Babylonian date palms, Indian sandalwood, even some weird Armenian apricots that never ripened properly but looked exotic enough to impress guests. You pass a thick patch of reeds, unexpected in this dry land, and he gestures at them fondly. "Brought those in myself," he says, "from a river so muddy you couldn't see your own toes." A pause. "Also," he adds, "I might have lost 3 oxen in that mud. Worth it." A low humming begins to rise as you enter another quadrant, this one heavy with jasmine and late blooming roses. The garden lanterns, oil-fed and glass-lensed, cast golden pools of light on the pathways. Their wicks sputter quietly in the mild breeze. And then, Around a corner, you almost trip over a man snoring on a bench. Cyrus stops, peering down at the lump under the blanket. Ardashir, he mutters. Of course. This apparently is the head horticulturalist. He's been here since the days of Cyrus's father and allegedly knows the garden better than anyone, except it seems when he's asleep. Cyrus nudges the man's foot with the tip of his sandal. Nothing. Watch this, he whispers, smirking. He takes a small sprig of rue, famous for its bitter, eye-watering smell, and wafts it under the man's nose. Ardashir bolts upright, flailing like a beetle tipped off a fig leaf. My king, he gasps. I was inspecting the moonflowers. Yes, Cyrus says dryly. Very horizontal of you. Ardashir squints around. You're not lost again, are you? Cyrus straightens. Number I'm surveying. With this one, he gestures to you as a witness. The old man rubs his eyes. Well, if you do need directions, the cypress arch is... But Cyrus has already started walking. You follow. Of course you do. You pass under a canopy of fig trees trained to grow over a trellis in a crisscrossing pattern that creates living shade. The moon filters through the leaves like silver lace. Somewhere nearby, a nightjar calls out with a haunting whistle. Cyrus pauses again. You know, he says, some believe gardens like this mimic the lost Garden of Eden. He turns to you. Do you think the original garden had this many mosquitoes? You swat one from your cheek and nod solemnly. Yes, probably more. There's something surreal about being lost this long. You've crossed quadrants now, at least 3, maybe more. A pavilion looms up ahead, its roof tiled in brilliant blue faience, reflecting starlight like a still pool. Cyrus walks inside and sits on the edge of a marble bench, exhaling like he's finally willing to admit he has no idea where the palace is anymore. He traces a line in the dust with his finger. I had a plan once to build a second garden, one with terraces, each level with a different climate. Snow on top, bananas at the bottom. The Greeks would lose their minds. You admit it sounds ambitious. He chuckles. Everything worth doing is. In the quiet, a breeze stirs, fluttering the edges of his robe. You think about how a man who forged one of history's greatest empires now finds joy in the twist of a vine, the scent of a flower, and a fountain that's probably mocking him. Then he says something soft, almost like a secret. When you rule everything, there's only one place left to conquer. You raise an eyebrow. Stillness, he whispers. A long pause follows, broken only by the rustle of jasmine. You sit there a while, not speaking, just listening to the garden breathe. Time stretches like warm honey. Cyrus stands, brushing off the bench dust with a sigh far too dramatic for a man wearing gold-threaded slippers. You trail behind him again as he slips through a jasmine-covered archway that leads, unfortunately for both of you, into what seems like an entirely new quadrant of the garden. I'm beginning to suspect, he murmurs, that this garden may have more dimensions than I approved. The next stretch of path winds like a lazy snake, flanked by raised beds filled with unfamiliar blossoms. One patch in particular glows faintly under the moonlight, its flowers pale and strange, 5-petaled with an iridescent sheen. They bloom only at night, Cyrus explains, and smell like overripe melon and warm bread. You lean in to confirm. He's not wrong. Somehow, it's both comforting and mildly nauseating. This is the garden's experimental section. Ardashir, when conscious, refers to it as the botanic frontier. It's the horticultural version of a sketchy side alley, full of imports, failed grafts, surprise thorns, and one memorable incident involving a pomegranate tree and a very confused owl. The pair of you wander deeper in. Cyrus stoops to inspect a cluster of thin, spindly vines with star-shaped pods. This one came from a distant island beyond India, he says. The sailors said it sings. You tilt your head, listening. Nothing. Well, he shrugs. They were drunk most of the voyage. A breeze stirs the heavy leaves. Somewhere above, a soft rustling suggests a bird or a ghost, depending on your tolerance for unexplained noises. Cyrus leads you toward a fountain at the center of this strange quadrant. Unlike the others, this one is dry, cracked. A ring of stone lions circles the base, their mouths open in perpetual silent roars. Moss carpets their jaws like unshaven beards. It stopped working after the earthquake, he says, but I keep it. Looks poetic. Historians still argue whether this part of the garden was a planned experiment or the result of years of unsanctioned horticultural freelancing. Some sources claim Cyrus encouraged innovation. Others suggest Ardashir just did whatever he wanted, as long as the king didn't catch him asleep again. You step carefully past a row of spiky aloe planted beside what appears to be cabbage. Cyrus notices your stare. It's not just cabbage, he says. It's imperial cabbage, best in Anatolia. He doesn't sound convinced. A sleepy cricket chirps somewhere nearby. You begin to feel like you've been in this garden for years. Time behaves differently here. It's not linear. It's botanical. You grow around it. You bloom into it. And eventually, you forget what the outside world smells like. Cyrus must sense it too. We might actually be lost, he admits. That, or we've entered some kind of floral underworld. You suggest retracing your steps. We've tried that, he says, looking pointedly at you. 4 times. It's hard to argue. As the path curls onward, you pass a row of trellised vines climbing wooden arches. Grapes hang in heavy purple clusters. He plucks one and pops it into his mouth with an exaggerated mmm. Then he offers you one. It's surprisingly sweet, more jam than fruit. These are watered with wine, he says casually. You choke. He grins. No, really, he says. One day a wineskin bursts near the root system. Next harvest, drunkest crows you've ever seen. The path widens into a grove, its floor blanketed in soft pine needles. Tall evergreens sway gently above you, despite the fact that evergreens shouldn't grow this well here. They were a gift from the Scythians, he says. Tried to send me horses. I asked for trees instead. A pause. Turns out trees bite fewer people. Under the grove's canopy sits another resting place, a half-sunken marble bench carved with strange symbols. Cyrus reads them slowly. "Do not trust the fountains after midnight," he says, arching an eyebrow. You both look warily at the nearest trickling basin. "I'm sure that's just poetic," he mutters. Somewhere in the trees, a night owl hoots, a sound so perfectly timed you both freeze, then laugh. The garden seems to hum with quiet mischief. A gentle fog begins to roll in, softening the lines of the hedges and the glint of lanterns. The ground feels plush underfoot, as if moss has replaced the usual gravel paths. "This wasn't here an hour ago," Cyrus notes, nudging the mist with his sandal. You nod. At this point, if a fountain started quoting philosophy, you wouldn't even blink. The garden is no longer just a place, it's a presence. You pass another statue, this one of a lion with wings perched atop a turtle. Cyrus tilts his head at it. "I do not remember commissioning that." Neither of you comments on the fact that its eyes follow you as you walk away. Backtracking seems impossible now. The layout has shifted, or your memory has. Either way, north feels like a suggestion rather than a direction. "I think," Cyrus says slowly, "this quadrant was Ardashir's private project." You glance around. An unsettling number of plants seem to be watching you. "Should have known," he mutters. "Man thinks time is a personality." Still, there's beauty here, even in the weirdness. Soft blooms open in the moonlight, unfurling petals like sighs. Dew beads on spiderwebs strung between branches. Somewhere, a water wheel turns lazily, its motion more lullaby than function. "I suppose," Cyrus muses, "if I must be lost somewhere, this isn't the worst place." He sits on a mossy boulder and gestures for you to join. "Let's wait here. Gardens like this, they eventually let you go. When they're ready." You nod and settle in, the scent of pine and overripe melons mingling in the cool air. The owl hoots again, the grapevines rustle, and somewhere behind you, a dry fountain stirs. The night deepens, and the garden's temperament shifts. You sit in the grove beside Cyrus, back against the mossy boulder, eyes drifting closed now and then, not from boredom, but from that rarest of things, stillness. It's the kind of stillness that belongs to old temples and overstuffed libraries, sacred, snooze-worthy. But just as your breathing begins to sink with the slow sway of the trees, Cyrus snaps upright with a grunt. "Enough lounging," he declares. "If I fall asleep out here, I'll wake up with a toad in my beard." You don't argue. Nobody needs to deal with amphibians in their facial hair before sunrise. He stands, brushes imaginary crumbs from his robe, and marches forward, presumably in a direction. You follow, trusting more in the inevitability of progress than in the actual navigation skills of a man who's been circling his own garden for 3 hours. Soon, the pine trees give way to a low, winding hill dotted with plants you don't recognize. They shimmer faintly, Cyrus squints at one. "Ah," he says, "the scentless narcissus." You lean in and take a deep whiff. Nothing. "It was bred for people with allergies," he explains. A few steps later, he points to another bloom. This one has long curling petals the colour of overripe peaches. "And that one?" "Makes goats sleepy if they eat it." You file that away under good to know, possibly useful. As you crest the hill, a peculiar sound filters through the air, like the rustle of parchment and the clink of tiny bells. You both pause. From behind, a wall of dense foliage emerges. A man, or rather, a man-sized bundle of robes with a magnificent beard and what appears to be a teacup balanced precariously on his head. "Ardashir," Cyrus exclaims, eyes wide. The gardener blinks. "Your Majesty," he says, "fancy meeting you here." Cyrus crosses his arms. "We've been walking in circles for hours." Ardashir scratches his head. "That can happen, especially if you start from the library spiral." "The what now?" You both stare at him. "It's a design principle," Ardashir mumbles. "Helps channel the chi of the breeze. Also good for draining rainwater. Mostly." You look back down the winding path. "Well," Cyrus says, pinching the bridge of his nose, "that explains nothing." Ardashir produces a small folded scroll from somewhere inside his robes. "I have a map." Cyrus snatches it with something like relief, until he unrolls it. The map is a swirling mass of lines, spirals and scribbles, peppered with ominous symbols like "Here be bees" and "Maybe fountain." There's even a crude sketch of a squirrel wearing a crown. "I drew that during lunch," Ardashir says proudly. Historians still debate whether Persian gardens followed strict geometric rules, or if they were more fluid, intuitive layouts. Based on this encounter, you suspect the answer is yes. Cyrus sighs and tucks the map into his belt with a weary dignity only monarchs can manage. "Fine. Lead us to the pavilion. I demand a chair." Ardashir nods and waddles forward with all the urgency of a man carrying several secret snacks in his sleeves. You follow him past a hedge of rustling sage and into a clearing lit by dozens of hanging lanterns. It's beautiful in a chaotic way, like a firefly convention or an art installation that got out of hand. In the center stands the garden pavilion, a low, open structure with filigreed columns and a domed roof painted with stars. It looks like something a poet would dream up halfway through a fever nap. "This," Ardashir announces, "is the pavilion of night air." You and Cyrus step up onto the cool stone floor. Cushions are scattered everywhere. A small brazier glows quietly in the corner, scenting the air with sandalwood and something vaguely floral. Cyrus drops onto a pillow with a groan of satisfaction. "I own half of Mesopotamia," he mutters, "and I had to climb a hill to find a cushion." Ardashir nods sympathetically and pours tea from a silver pot that may or may not have been heated by moonlight. The tea is oddly refreshing, cool, with a hint of mint and something sharper. like ginger or mild sarcasm. Family recipe, Ardashir offers. Somewhere in the garden, a wind chime tinkles lazily. Cyrus lounges back, one arm draped dramatically over his eyes. This was supposed to be a simple moonlight stroll. Technically, it still is, Ardashir says. You're just very committed. Outside the pavilion, shadows shift again. The moon has risen higher, and the garden glows a silvery blue. The hedges now resemble waves. The trees, tall shadows of forgotten giants. The three of you sit in silence for a while. The fire crackles, tea steams. You're not sure if time is moving forward or backward anymore. Eventually, Cyrus speaks again. You know, I designed this garden to impress visiting rulers. A statement of order, harmony, the might of Persia made gentle. You glance around. A squirrel darts past, dragging a cherry in its tiny mouth like a thief in the night. I see, you say carefully. He chuckles. Somehow, it turned into a labyrinth of sleepy goats and plants that smell like old fruit. Ardashir beams. That's the charm. And honestly, it is. Somewhere deep in the garden, a faint splash echoes, perhaps a fountain rebooting. Perhaps not. Maybe the garden is simply shifting again, the way dreams do when you've fallen too far into sleep to care about logic. You sip the last of your tea. It tastes like distance and rest. Cyrus exhales long and low. Well, I suppose if I had to get lost, it might as well be in something beautiful I helped create. The wind rustles, lanterns sway, the scent of sage drifts through, and for the first time tonight, you feel that the garden has acknowledged you, not as invaders, but as welcomed wanderers. The garden breathes around you. Now seated comfortably within the open-sided pavilion, your eyes trace the undulating shadows of vine-draped beams above. Somewhere in the rafters, a gecko blinks slowly, pausing mid-crawl as if listening in on the royal gossip below. The air hums, not with insects or music, but with a kind of old silence that's learned to let others speak first. Cyrus exhales again, longer this time. His fingers drum lightly on the rim of his teacup. We're still lost, aren't we? Ardashir gives a small, apologetic shrug. We're somewhere. That's half the battle. There's a pause. What's the other half, you ask? Accepting it. You let that sink in while staring at a lantern shaped like a fig. The flame inside flickers lazily, like it too has grown tired of pretending it knows where it's going. Outside, the moonlight has shifted, and now the shadows stretch in unfamiliar directions. The stars above peek between leaves, but their constellations twist like ink spilled into water. Even the Big Dipper looks tipsy. Historians still argue, Cyrus murmurs, more to himself than anyone, whether gardens like this were spiritual metaphors or just lavish hobby projects for bored kings. He swirls the tea. Perhaps it's both, a monument to beauty and my attention span. You can't help but smile. To be fair, Your Majesty, you did commission a squirrel amphitheatre. Cyrus waves a hand. Oh, That was for morale, theirs and mine. Silence drapes over the pavilion again. It's thick, comfortable, like a wool blanket that smells faintly of lavender and old paper. You rest your head against one of the cool stone columns, letting the sensation of its centuries seep into your skin. And then, just as your breathing starts to slow, did I ever tell you about the time I tried to turn a canal into a wine river? You crack one eye open, number, but I deeply wish you would. Cyrus leans back, eyes twinkling. It was during the festival of Mithra. I was trying to impress a visiting envoy from Sogdiana. We diverted part of the aqueduct and ran diluted Shiraz through it, just for the afternoon. Unfortunately, someone forgot to factor in the pigeons. Ardashir groaned softly. Oh no. Exactly. Drunk pigeons. Everywhere. The pavilion echoes with the low rumble of royal laughter. Even the gecko seems amused. You shake your head, filing this moment away as one of those rare things you'll try to describe to someone else one day and realize it sounds entirely made up. The conversation turns, meanders, like a stream finding its own rhythm. Cyrus speaks of his childhood, of the time he stole a melon from the palace kitchens and was chased by a peacock for 2 hours, of a general who once got lost in his own tent because he couldn't read his own directional banners. North is always where you hang your socks, Cyrus barks, quoting the man's absurd military logic. You giggle, an actual giggle. It sneaks out before you can help it. Time softens. You don't know how long you sit there, trading odd stories and sipping tea that never seems to empty. The garden beyond shifts in colour as the moon dips westward. A faint fog settles in, curling around low bushes and giving everything a dreamlike floatiness. Suddenly, a bell rings in the distance. Once, twice, then a pause, then 3 short chimes. Cyrus sits up. That's not random. That's Shapur's code. Shapur, you ask? The gardener's apprentice, Ardashir explains. He doesn't believe in maps. He believes in bells. That's almost comforting, you say, although you're not sure why. The bells chime again, this time from the opposite direction. Cyrus frowns. Unless someone else is using the bells. You exchange looks. There's something almost theatrical about the idea of bell-based navigation in a moonlit garden. But the tension is short-lived. From the edge of the clearing, a bush rustles. A head pops out, young, wild-haired, eyes slightly too wide. Found you, Shapur beams. Eventually. Eventually? Cyrus raises an eyebrow. I had to circle the mango maze 3 times. I'm 90% sure it moved. You don't doubt it. Shapur steps fully into the lantern light, brushing leaves from his tunic. He carries a wooden chime slung over one shoulder, and he smells like oranges and trial and error. I was trying to find the pavilion of reflections, he explains. Instead, I found a pavilion of bees, again. Ardashir nods solemnly. We've all been there. You glance back at the garden. Somewhere out there is a place named after bees, possibly inhabited by them. and yet you remain seated, cozy, and unstung. A win. So, Shapur says, plopping onto a cushion, "Are we trying to get unlost now?" Cyrus sighs. "I'm not sure I want to be found. Not yet." The prince leans back, head tilted to the stars. "I set out tonight to find a sense of clarity, a moment without ministers, without court, without shoes full of sand." He lifts one foot and shows the audience. Definitely sandy. "And instead," he continues, "I found a wandering path, a tea pavilion, and 2 gardeners with questionable spatial awareness." He smiles. "I call that an upgrade." There's a pause. Then Shapur raises a hand. "There's a shortcut through the olive grove," he offers. "If you want it." "Maybe," Cyrus replies. "Eventually." Another silence. Another gust of wind, rustling the fig-shaped lanterns and teasing the edge of your robe. You feel sleep tugging at your limbs again, soft and persistent. Outside, the garden hums in its strange, timeless rhythm. Here, in this odd haven of herbs and high conversation, even the idea of direction feels unnecessary. You rise again, not because you want to, but because Cyrus decides it's time for movement, and refusing a Persian king, even a mildly lost one, feels impolite. The tea is gone. The pavilion, reluctantly, is left behind. The 3 of you shuffle off through a path lined with myrtle and moonflowers, their white petals glowing faintly like forgotten constellations. Shapur insists this is the shortcut, though he's yet to explain what it's short of. "I designed this path myself," he brags, stepping nimbly over a sleeping tortoise. "Oh no," Ardashir murmurs. Each turn is supposed to correspond to a verse in the Shahnameh. Shapur adds, "You look at Cyrus. Have you memorized the Shahnameh?" Cyrus lets out a quiet, regal wheeze. "Only the bits with dragons." Ahead, Shapur turns abruptly left, nearly colliding with a citrus tree. A lemon drops and thuds gently to the earth. He picks it up and hands it to you, as though that settles some ancient debt. You continue walking. The night air has cooled even more, and there's a pleasant dampness to the earth beneath your sandals. Cool and just slightly squishy, like cake left out overnight. As you weave between low hedges and zigzagging paths, Cyrus begins reminiscing again. This place was modelled after Cyrus the Great's original paradise garden near Pasargadae, supposedly. He stops to admire a carved stone bench with tiny lions on the legs, though whether the original actually had citrus groves or peacock pools is still debated. Historians argue over the details constantly. Some say it was a strict geometric layout. Others insist it was more of a wild meadow, fenced in by reeds and poetic ambition. "And you chose all of it?" you ask. Cyrus grins. "Why not both?" You pass under an arch strung with what appear to be dried pomegranate rinds. They give off a sweet, dusty aroma, like antique syrup. Shapur, meanwhile, seems to be following an internal compass, powered mostly by optimism and midnight snacks. At one point, he stops dead in his tracks and holds up a finger. Do you hear that? You strain to listen. A faint sound, sort of a slow, splashing plunk-plunk, echoes from somewhere ahead. Fountain? Ardashir guesses. Or a very relaxed goose, Cyrus adds. The sound draws you onward. Soon you arrive at a small hidden courtyard encircled by yew trees. At the centre is indeed a fountain, burbling lazily over a tier of carved stone turtles. Around the edges of the pool are flat rocks shaped like petals, inviting weary travellers to sit. Without needing to speak, all three of you settle down. Cyrus removes his sandals. Shapur lies flat on his back and tries to count the stars. You trail your fingers in the cool water and wonder if this is what peace actually feels like. I come here more often than I admit, the king says after a long pause. You glance over. Sometimes I pretend to be lost, just to escape to this corner. Everyone assumes I've been summoned somewhere else. Nobody questions it. Shapur snorts. That's probably because they assume you've wandered off again. Exactly, Cyrus says. It's the one royal habit that served me better than gold. Strategic disappearance. He dips a toe in the water, watches the ripples fan outward. This garden, it's not just for beauty. It's my silence, my refusal to be pulled in 100 directions at once. You nod slowly. The sound of the fountain, the chirp of distant frogs, the occasional yawn from Ardashir, it all melds into a kind of living lullaby. You feel your breath deepen. Cyrus plucks a flower from a nearby shrub, jasmine. He sniffs it, then tucks it behind his ear with a shrug, as if to say, why not? I used to think gardens were about order, he muses. Lines, symmetry, control over nature. And now, you ask. Now, I think they're about surrender. You glance at the vines curling around a statue's arm, the moss eating the edge of the path, the dandelions poking defiantly through perfect geometry. Nature wins? Cyrus smiles. Nature always wins, but she lets you pretend you're in charge until she decides otherwise. You lean back on the stone. It's warm from the day's sun, even now. You tilt your head to the sky and listen. Somewhere in the trees, a nightjar begins its odd, metallic song. A rhythmic whir, almost like a tiny spinning coin caught in slow motion. Shapur sits up. We're near the garden's western edge. I can smell the barley fields. I smell figs, you say. That's me, Cyrus admits. I may have crushed one in my pocket. You blink. You carry fruit in your royal robes? Emergency fig, he says seriously. Standard royal protocol. You lose it again, stifling laughter into your sleeve. The absurdity is so gentle, so disarming. Here you are, in a garden that can't make up its mind between labyrinth and lullaby, sitting with a king who hoards figs and wears jasmine, following a path no one fully understands. It feels like a dream, but one that doesn't rush or twist, just drifts. Cyrus eventually stands. He looks toward the faintest glow of pre-dawn rising behind the hills. We should be heading back soon, but not yet. The three of you linger at the fountain a little longer. You splash your face gently, the water cold and sweet. For a moment, you imagine you could curl up right here on the stone, and the garden would simply grow around you. Vines covering your arms, flowers blooming in your hair, moss tucking you in like a blanket. You let that thought stretch, let it grow roots, let it bloom. Eventually, of course, you do rise, though only with great reluctance and a sound that might qualify as a sigh, or perhaps a deeply introspective grunt. Cyrus claps his hands once, softly. Time to resume our valiant campaign against direction. Shapur, now reinvigorated after a brief nap disguised as astronomy, leaps up and immediately leads you into another turn. This one seemingly through a narrow corridor of plum trees bowed low by fruit. One ripe plum thuds to the ground beside you with a meaty splat. No one speaks of it. You all simply pretend it didn't happen. The path becomes gravel now, with those decorative white pebbles that crunch in a way that makes you deeply self-conscious about every footstep. You try to walk quietly, which only makes each step louder. Ardashir behind you whispers, like a stealthy goat, and you nearly trip laughing. The gravel leads into a part of the garden you haven't yet seen. It's flatter here, more open. Low hedges trace long rectangular borders, and the air smells faintly of mint and vinegar. You see small clay jars set in symmetrical rows between the plots, some with copper lids, some open to the air. The shapes are unfamiliar, but the purpose becomes clearer when Cyrus pauses beside one and lifts the lid. Inside, brine, floating herbs, olives. Ah, he sighs. The pickling beds. You blink. You have a section of your royal garden dedicated to pickles. It's not just pickles, Shapur chimes in. It's a controlled microclimate for fermenting. Very fashionable. Cyrus grins. This one's modelled after the ancient Median method. Buried clay pots, shade from fennel stalks, occasional poetry readings. Ardashir mutters. No one read poetry to pickles. Historians argue that some verses were whispered to lentils in the Neo-Assyrian period. Shapur offers cheerfully. No, they don't. Ardashir shoots back. They might, Shapur insists. You can't prove they didn't. While they debate the lyrical preferences of legumes, you walk slowly among the low rows. The moonlight catches on the glassy surface of a pomegranate reduction bubbling quietly in a shallow basin. The scent is tangy and rich, like a forgotten feast. You trail a hand along the top of one clay vessel, feeling the etched pattern, a swirling vine motif, almost like a fingerprint made by a bored potter with artistic tendencies and too much time. Cyrus joins you, holding a small jar of something yellow-green. He unscrews the top, sniffs it, winces, and hands it to you with a sly look. Smell this. You take a cautious whiff. It smells like garlic, honey, and regret. What is that? Persian sleep aid. Garlic soaked in sour grape must. Only works if you believe in it hard enough. You hand it back very carefully. I believe in not drinking that. I respect your theological stance, Cyrus replies. As you wander deeper, you notice the path begins to fork again, leading off towards several domed structures, small rounded huts made of pale stone, barely taller than a man. One has an iron door slightly ajar. You point. What's in there? Cyrus shrugs. Could be saffron. Could be badgers. Why would there be badgers? He doesn't answer. Instead, you all follow a trail of lavender sachets, someone's idea of aromatherapeutic wayfinding, until you arrive at a low bench beside a circular pool ringed with crushed herbs. At its centre floats a tiny raft made of cedar twigs, bearing a lit candle and a single rose petal. Offering to Anahita, Shapur says reverently. You nod. The goddess of water, right? Among other things, fertility, wisdom, healing. He trails off. Ardashir mutters, and occasional nighttime confusion. The candle flickers as a breeze stirs the surface of the pool. You watch it drift slowly, carried by the smallest of currents. It feels symbolic. Of what, you're not entirely sure, but your brain is too softened by jasmine and moonlight to argue. Cyrus leans forward, his face lit softly from below. I sometimes think this is the part of the garden that remembers things, he says. The pickling jars, the herb beds, the little shrines. It's like a pantry for memories. Some sweet, some fermented. You smile. And some best left sealed. Exactly. A moment of silence follows. Just the candle, floating. Just the wind through dill stalks. Just the faint, indignant quack of a duck somewhere in the distance. Ardashir finally asks, does this garden actually have badgers? Shapur looks offended. This garden has everything. You think of the paths you've walked tonight, the feasting circle, the cool pavilion, the eerie statues, the lemon-scented shadows. You haven't seen the same part twice, yet somehow it all feels connected, as though the garden has no map, only moods. Your foot brushes something under the bench. You reach down and find a small wooden comb carved with tiny figures dancing in a circle, left behind by someone long ago, or perhaps by the garden itself, offering you a gift. Cyrus sees you examining it. That belonged to my grandmother, he says softly. She used to say, the garden knew when you needed a little beauty. You tuck the comb gently into your pocket. The candle finally sputters out. The breeze carries the scent of basil and warm dust. And somewhere overhead, a comet slips across the sky, like a spark escaping from the forge of some long-forgotten god. You say nothing. You just keep walking. The early morning mist begins to thicken as you tread further into the garden's quieter corners, where the cobblestones are slick with dew and the scent of crushed herbs fills the air. Your breath forms soft clouds that mingle with the faint sweetness of honeysuckle, making the world feel simultaneously vast and intimate. Cyrus moves beside you with a lightness unexpected from a king who spent the night wandering lost in his own palace grounds. You can't help but notice how his eyes, now clearer in the cool dawn, seem to carry a distant memory, as if the garden had whispered something just out of reach. Have you ever wondered why kings built gardens like this? He asks, almost rhetorically. You shrug. To impress guests? To show off wealth? He chuckles softly. Partly, but it's also a kind of storybook. A place to rewrite the world, one plant at a time. And sometimes, a way to get lost deliberately. You nod, thinking of the twisting paths, the unexpected statues, and the pockets of calm scattered like hidden chapters. Historians still argue whether these gardens were designed more for the soul or for political theatre. Cyrus continues. Whether the king's presence or absence mattered most. You glance at him, curious. Sometimes, he admits, the garden becomes a stage where the ruler performs solitude, a paradox. Ahead, a gentle rustling draws your attention to a low hedge where a small family of partridges scurries, their feathers blending seamlessly with the foliage. You watch quietly, not wanting to disturb their morning routine. Nearby, a cluster of ceramic pots hold strange herbs you don't recognize, their leaves curling like ancient scripts. Shapur appears beside you and offers an explanation. These are rare medicinal plants used in early Persian remedies. Some say they could cure insomnia. Others swear they cause vivid dreams. You raise an eyebrow. Which is it? Historians still debate their true effects, Shapur says with a grin. Either way, they're perfect for a garden meant to lull visitors into reverie. The soft light shifts as the sun peeks over distant hills, casting elongated shadows that stretch like sleepy cats. You feel a deep calm settling over you, a gentle invitation to pause, breathe, and simply be. Cyrus pauses beside an ancient stone basin filled with cool water. He cups his hands, splashes his face, then wipes it with a cloth embroidered with subtle gold threads. You know, he says quietly, the ancients believed water had memory, that it could hold traces of all who touched it. You consider this as you dip your fingers into the basin, the water surprisingly cold and clear. Imagine, Cyrus muses, if this garden remembers every lost visitor, every whispered secret, every moment of quiet confusion. You smile, imagining the garden as a vast living diary, its pages composed of leaves, stones, and water. As you continue walking, the path narrows, flanked by tall cypress trees that seem to guard the garden's deepest secrets. You feel the weight of centuries pressing gently against your skin, like a soft cloak. A sudden breeze carries the faintest sound of a flute, distant and almost forgotten. You stop, listening. It's the nightingale's cousin, Ardashir says. Some say the music is natural. Others claim it's the garden itself humming. You lean back against a tree trunk, closing your eyes. The melody weaves through the branches, a delicate thread connecting past and present. In this moment, lost in the garden's embrace, you understand why Cyrus might choose to disappear here. Not out of neglect or whimsy, but out of a profound need to belong somewhere that honors the quiet chaos of being human. The garden, after all, is not just a place. It's a feeling, a gentle surrender, a soft hello whispered in the language of flowers. And as the morning light warms your face, you realize you wouldn't mind getting lost here a little longer. The sun rises higher, but the garden's shade remains cool, a comfortable retreat from the heat that will inevitably settle over the day. Your feet brush over soft moss, carpeting the ground near a small stone bench. It looks inviting, worn smooth by centuries of use, or maybe just the weight of tired monarchs seeking a pause. You sit, letting the world slow around you. The distant chatter of birds blends with the hum of unseen insects, crafting a natural lullaby. Cyrus, Shapur, and Ardashir settle nearby, each lost in their own thoughts. The kind of quiet companionship that needs no words. You know, Cyrus begins, gardens like this were also places of diplomacy, not just pretty scenery. You look up, curious. Kings met here to negotiate treaties, settle disputes, even hatch conspiracies, he says with a conspiratorial grin. The greenery helped soften the mood. Plus, it was easier to slip away unnoticed if things got tense. Shapur adds, it's why there are so many secret paths and hidden alcoves, perfect for whispered deals or discreet exits. You imagine a royal emissary tiptoeing through fragrant lemon trees, clutching a scroll while trying not to crush a plum. The garden, once a symbol of order, doubles as a labyrinth of political intrigue. Historians still argue how much power was actually brokered beneath these boughs, Ardashir remarks. Some say it was mostly for show. Others believe real alliances were forged here. Your mind drifts to the idea of politics mingling with nature, a delicate dance where power hides beneath petals and leaves. Nearby, a fountain burbles softly, water catching the sunlight in a fleeting rainbows. Tiny fish dart beneath the surface, their scales shimmering like jewels. You spot a peculiar carving on the fountain's base, a serpent eating its own tail, an ancient symbol of eternity. Shapur notices your gaze. That's the Ouroboros, he explains, represents cycles, renewal, and sometimes confusion, like trying to find your way out of a garden. You chuckle softly, thinking of Cyrus's recent adventures. It's fitting, you say. Lost, found, lost again. Cyrus smiles wistfully. Maybe the garden is less about direction and more about surrender. A faint breeze stirs the leaves, carrying with it a scent of jasmine and earth. The sounds, the smells, the coolness, they wrap around you like a soft blanket, urging your thoughts to slow, your muscles to relax. You feel your eyelids grow heavy. The garden's gentle embrace is a reminder. Sometimes getting lost is the only way to truly find peace. The hours stretch, unhurried. You wander onward beneath a vaulted trellis of flowering vines that form a loose tunnel overhead, petals drifting down like confetti from an invisible wedding. A slow rustle accompanies every step you take, sandals brushing against fallen blossoms and gravel, soft as a whisper. Cyrus has become oddly silent, walking a few paces ahead. His posture is upright, but there's a looseness to it now, like he's surrendered to the garden's rhythm. You suspect the weight of kingship has melted a little, tucked into the foliage alongside the ceremonial burdens he's chosen, for now, to ignore. I used to come here with my grandfather, he says quietly, breaking the stillness. He told me each plant had a story. If I could remember them all, I'd never lose my way. You glance at the endless rows of shrubs, fruit trees, and rare flowers, and smirk. That sounds like a trap. Cyrus laughs softly. Maybe. He was a cunning old man. A sudden shift in the terrain brings you to a series of raised garden beds arranged in perfect geometric patterns, squares within squares, paths forming intersections like a sleepy little map. These are parts of the Chahar Bagh, Shapur says, gesturing. It means 4 gardens, a Persian style symbolizing paradise, with 4 rivers and perfect symmetry. The design is almost mathematical, but still warm, orderly without being cold. Shallow channels carry water in straight lines, splitting and converging with gentle gurgles. Historians still debate whether this was purely aesthetic or deeply symbolic, Shapur adds. Some say it reflects ancient Zoroastrian cosmology, fire, earth, water, and air in harmony. You nod, imagining the garden as both blueprint and poem. Not just a place to stroll, but a sacred geometry etched in soil. Near one corner, a fig tree leans slightly over the water channel, its leaves shaped like tiny green hands. You pluck one of the ripe figs, its skin bursting with sweetness, and offer it to Cyrus. Food always tastes better outside, you remark. He takes a bite, chews slowly, especially when you're lost and haven't eaten since last night. You remember suddenly that you've been wandering for hours with no real meal. But the garden offers small delights, fruit from trees, herbs you crush between your fingers, mint leaves that refresh your mouth and nostrils in one go. You pass a marble pedestal with a sundial, faint shadows stretching across its aged face. Does it even work? You ask. Cyrus squints at it, shrugs. Only if you stop walking. He drops onto a shaded bench beneath a pomegranate tree and pats the space beside him. You sit, and the soft creak of old wood echoes faintly beneath you both. You know, he says, when the palace architects built this garden, they had to import soil, reroute water from miles away, and bribe half the countryside to get the right trees. You raise an eyebrow. Sounds exhausting. He nods. Gardens aren't passive beauty. They're built on effort, obsession, and a little insanity. You look around. The symmetry, the flowers, the citrus trees with trunks older than entire dynasties. It's hard to imagine the years of planning and maintenance that brought this place into being. Ardashir, sitting cross-legged on the grass, chimes in. There's an old story that one of the royal gardeners was banished for trimming a bush too perfectly. The king thought it looked unnatural. You blink. He was exiled for too much symmetry. Apparently, it gave the king an existential crisis. Ardashir says with a grin. You lean back, letting your head tip toward the tree canopy above. The wind stirs again, and the branches creak softly like an old song. There is a stillness now, a moment where time feels paused, between birdsong beneath rustling leaves, with sunlight flickering gently across your arms. The garden has stopped being a maze and become a sanctuary. And you think, maybe that was the point all along. The light begins to slant, that warm amber hue settling across the garden like melted gold. You follow a sloping stone path that curves gently along the outer wall, your fingertips trailing the warm brick as you walk. The air has shifted. Less brightness, more hush. Even the birds seem to be winding down for the day. Cyrus is lagging now, distracted by a squirrel perched on the lip of a cracked amphora, nibbling something furiously. That squirrel has a better sense of direction than I do, he mutters. Shapur chuckles behind you. At least he knows where he buried his snacks. You pause at a narrow doorway tucked into the garden wall. It's nearly overgrown, framed by ivy and shaded by an overhanging fig tree. It looks like a secret. Naturally, you step inside. The passageway is aligned with cool clay tiles, and it opens into a walled-off microgarden, one of the private nooks designed for personal reflection or royal sulking, depending on the day. This is the king's secluded rest garden, Ardashir says, peering around. A space for poetry readings, or quiet tea, or when you need to fake your own disappearance. Cyrus raises an eyebrow. Fake your own what? Oh yes, Ardashir says casually. Several monarchs went missing in the garden to avoid court duties. They disappeared for hours. Once a vizier even held a mock funeral because he thought the king had drowned in the fountain. You glance at the modest water feature in the center. A serene pool, its still surface only broken by a lazy dragonfly skimming the top. Historians still argue whether that disappearance was genuine or just an early form of self-care, Shapur adds. Cyrus looks around, then sprawls dramatically on a stone bench. If anyone asks, I've perished nobly among the peonies. You can't help but laugh. The tension has eased in all of you, replaced with the kind of loopy energy that comes after hours in the sun and mild dehydration. You sit nearby, stretching your legs toward a sunbeam that filters through the leaves. The smells here are different, cooler, more herbal. Basil, thyme, and some unfamiliar green thing with spiny leaves. You crush one between your fingers and inhale. It smells like licorice, and pine had a quiet forest baby. I think this is the section where they tested medicinal herbs, Shapur says. Royal physicians would experiment with new blends here. Some were calming tonics. Others made you think you were a goat. Sounds like a risky tea party, you say. Cyrus leans his head back against the bench, eyes closed. Once I drank something called moonroot cordial. Had dreams that I was being chased by my own crown. The pool ripples as a breeze glides over its surface. A few petals drift down, settling in the water like fallen stars. Time has slowed so much it might be walking backward. Do you think it's possible, Cyrus murmurs, to be lost in the right way? The question hovers, delicate and strange. You don't answer. The garden does. A cicada begins its slow, rhythmic call. Not insistent, just steady. A lullaby with legs and wings. You sit together, silent again, breathing in the layered sense of history and time as the garden folds the world in softer edges. You've stopped trying to navigate. The map has dissolved into earth and leaf, and with it, the need to arrive. Eventually, hunger outweighs wonder. Your stomach lets out a low, traitorous growl, echoed, embarrassingly, by Cyrus's own royal rumble. Even Shapur clears his throat in what you suspect is code, for we should find snacks before we eat each other. You rise reluctantly, brushing dried leaves from your tunic. The sun is now low, filtering through the garden in long golden rays that make every dust mote feel sacred. Cyrus points toward a distant copse of trees that seem unnaturally symmetrical. There's a pavilion that way, he says, squinting. If I remember correctly, the cooks used to set up light meals there in the evenings. And if you don't remember correctly, you ask. He shrugs. Then we starve beautifully. You make your way through another hedged corridor, this one narrower, flanked with flowering almond trees. Their sweet scent hangs in the air like spun sugar. A pair of doves flutter overhead. One drops a small white blob directly in front of Cyrus's foot. A near assassination attempt, he mutters. That one had intent. You laugh, too tired to do anything but marvel at how even imperial misadventures can include bird poop. Soon enough, the trees part to reveal the pavilion, open-sided, draped in linen and grapevines, with a low stone table and long cushions scattered around it like a royal picnic gone rogue. There's no feast laid out, but to your surprise, there is a basket, shaded beneath a thick fig leaf. Inside, you find flatbread, dates, a soft goat cheese wrapped in leaves, and something that might be pomegranate molasses. Well, Cyrus says, either someone still thinks I'm alive, or the garden itself is now feeding us. Ardashir takes a dramatic sniff. Either way, I'm not asking questions. You eat slowly, savouring each bite as if it were treasure. The flatbread is slightly stale, but the cheese makes up for it, tangy and soft. You dip it in the molasses and hum with satisfaction. This, you say between bites, beats military rations. Cyrus nods. The army once tried to march on dried apricots in hope. As you eat, the garden sounds change. Cicadas give way to crickets. Somewhere nearby, a fountain babbles, but now it feels like a lullaby rather than background noise. A breeze picks up, rustling the vines overhead. One tendril brushes your ear, and you swat it reflexively. Still lost? You ask, licking molasses from your fingers. Shapur consults a folded piece of parchment he's been carrying, apparently the same one he swore he wasn't using earlier. We're either 2 turns from the main gate or entering the crocodile pond, he says. There's a crocodile pond, you ask. Not anymore, he replies, which is somehow less reassuring. Cyrus leans back, arms behind his head. If we don't make it out, this isn't a bad final meal. Please, Ardasha scoffs. Your ghost would haunt the dessert table. Historians still argue, you say through a yawn, whether this pavilion was meant for casual meals or secret meetings. Either way, it's a good spot to pretend nothing important exists. Cyrus seems to agree. His eyes are half closed, limbs stretched like a cat in a sunbeam. The garden has settled into a hush that doesn't beg for movement, the kind of silence that says, stay a while longer. You lie down fully, cheek against a pillow that smells faintly of cardamom. A vine tickles your ankle, like the garden itself is nudging you to rest. You oblige. Above, the first star appears, and below it, somewhere in a garden that doesn't seem to end, a king stretches in the twilight, as lost and at peace as anyone could hope to be. Night finally arrives, not like a switch flipped, but like a curtain slowly drawn, thread by thread. You notice it in the way the edges of things soften, in how the sounds grow rounder, thicker. The warmth remains, but now it's from below, rising up from the sun-soaked stones beneath your feet. You stir from your recline on the pavilion cushion. Around you, the others are quiet. Cyrus lies sprawled, one sandal off, muttering in his sleep about overcooked barley. Shapur is gently snoring with a fig leaf covering his face. Ardashir, ever the alert one, is awake, but only just, eyes glassy with sleep, cradling a half-eaten date. You rise and stretch, the sky above going navy. Stars begin to punch through, and for the first time, you realize just how vast this garden is, and how vast the sky feels when seen through its framing treetops. Let's walk, you whisper to whoever's listening, and maybe to the garden itself. Your feet crunch on gravel as you follow a new trail, this one lit by small, ancient oil lanterns set into recessed niches in the walls. Their flames flicker gently, more glow than blaze, illuminating vines and stone in soft pulses. The smell of jasmine has intensified now, weaving through the air like a slow melody. Soon, the path brings you to a domed structure, barely taller than a hut. Its door is open. You step inside. The ceiling is a low dome of polished stone, inlaid with tiny shards of reflective crystal. A pool occupies the center of the room, round and perfectly still, its surface mirroring the soft star-speckled ceiling. It's quiet here in a different way, dense and padded, like sound itself has chosen to curl up and nap. Ardashir enters behind you. This, he says softly, is the stargazing chamber. You nod, not needing the explanation. It's obvious. The space seems built for stillness, for questions without answers, for slow, thoughtful sighs. You think the king ever found his way out, you ask. Ardashir shrugs. Historians still argue whether he ever wanted to. You sit beside the pool, knees tucked up, watching your reflection stretch and shiver in the water. There's something deliciously ironic about a king with the largest empire of his time being completely, gloriously, voluntarily misplaced. Maybe this whole garden was a trap, you muse. Not for enemies, for egos. That would explain the mirrored ceilings, Ardashir quips. You lie back on the cool floor, the stone pleasantly chilled against your spine. Your vision fills with that mosaic of stars, both the ones above and the ones below. For a moment, you lose track of which way is up. You think about how meticulously this garden was planned, the geometry, the layers of meaning, the scent cycles, the birds placed in specific areas at specific times. And still, it unraveled into chaos the moment you entered. Maybe that was the point. Kings built walls for control, Ardashir says behind you. But gardens are for letting go. You smile, eyes half closed. Maybe that's why I'm still here. Outside, a breeze picks up again, rustling the papyrus reeds just beyond the chamber walls. It carries with it a sound. Bells? No, wind chimes, faint and wooden, like the garden itself is exhaling. You sit up and see the others approaching slowly. Cyrus is rubbing his eyes, sandal back on, looking less like a king and more like someone who fell asleep in a hammock and dreamt of bureaucracy. Shapur stretches, yawns, and plops beside you with the weariness of someone who's aged emotionally by about 6 months in a single day. We should find the way out, Cyrus says. Ardashir squints up at the stars through the open dome. Or we could admit we are out of time, of purpose, of needing to get anywhere. Silence follows. Not discomfort, just the kind of silence that happens when no one wants to ruin a good line. Let's stay a little longer, you say finally, and they all nod. The garden, it seems, is in no rush to release you. By now, you've given up on tracing paths or remembering landmarks. You walk only where your feet feel inclined to go. The others fall in beside you. Less a group, more a quiet procession, drifting between cypress shadows and moonlit lilies. Somewhere ahead, the night insects hum in near-perfect rhythm, as if rehearsed. You pass a square reflecting pool surrounded by marble benches. It's so still, you catch a glimpse of your own silhouette overlapping with Cyrus's. A king and a nobody, twin ghosts haunting the same dream. Imagine, Cyrus says softly, spending a lifetime building an empire, only to find more peace getting lost in your own backyard. You glance at him sideways. His tunic is wrinkled, his beard slightly lopsided from sleep, but his voice carries the weight of someone who's no longer pretending to lead, just learning to be. That's the trick of legacy, Ardashir murmurs. You spend your life carving your name into stone, then forget how to read it. You turn down another corridor, this one low, the trees bending inward to form an arched canopy overhead. For a brief moment, the moon vanishes entirely. It feels like stepping into a tunnel of leaves, as if the garden is drawing you into its lungs. You emerge in a circular clearing lit by hundreds of fireflies. At first, you think it's lanterns again, until one flits directly past your nose. They blink and float in sync, like stars rehearsing a lullaby. Everyone stands still. Historians still argue whether Persian gardens were meant to imitate paradise or provoke introspection. Cyrus whispers. Well, you say, it's definitely provoking something. No one speaks after that. What's there to add? You sit in the grass, damp, cool, but not uncomfortable. One by one, the others follow. You lie down again and stare upward. The garden, impossibly, seems to rotate around you. Not literally, but in that half-dreamed way of the very tired. Cypress trees swirl like slow galaxies, and fireflies dot the edges of your vision. And finally, you feel it. Not exhaustion, though that's part of it. Not relief, though that too. No, what you feel is surrender. You no longer care whether you're found, whether you find the exit, whether the garden is a maze or a sanctuary, or some elaborate joke crafted by a long-dead monarch with too much time and too many stonecutters. You are still, entirely, Your last waking thought before your eyes drift closed is something like, "Let the garden keep me a little longer." And maybe it does. Maybe Cyrus, now snoring softly beside you, is never seen again. Maybe the others are found, or maybe they fade into myth, like so many who wandered off and didn't want to come back. Maybe, somewhere in the vast estate archives, there's a short, forgotten note. King left palace, didn't return, garden suspects involvement. Or maybe not, because some stories aren't meant to be solved, just strolled through, like moonlit paths on a warm Persian night, like this one. And now, the night grows deeper still. The fireflies dim. The breeze softens until it's barely there. A whisper through dry leaves. A hush across still water. Even the crickets quiet, as if they too are falling asleep. You've wandered long and far through this place, through symmetry and scent, through fountains and lost pavilions, through conversation and silence, through the long unravelling of urgency. You came looking for a story, or maybe an exit, but instead you found stillness, which, if we're being honest, was probably what you needed all along. Breathe in, slow and gentle. Let the air settle warm behind your ribs. Exhale. Let it take with it whatever rush or noise followed you in. The stars above you don't ask for anything. They've watched gardens like this come and go, watched empires rise and vanish, watched kings get lost and not mind at all. You're safe here. You're exactly where you need to be, not solving anything, not chasing, just lying on cool grass in a garden older than maps, listening to the echo of footfalls that no longer matter. Let your eyelids grow heavier. Let your thoughts drift the way lanterns drift on still water. No destination, just motion, just calm. And if you dream tonight, may it be of moonlight and jasmine, of silent fountains and soft laughter, of a king who wandered off and found something better than direction. Good night, traveller. Sleep well. Sweet dreams.